you did discover something.
Yep.
There's a very quick shot of Augie racing. Now, what violation in street racing culture did Augie violate?
There's a few violations here. So violation number 1 is this. You don't race in an automatic transmission.
Not cool.
Nobody races using an automatic transmission.
And if you do, you're a loser.
Well, you're not racing. You're not controlling the vehicle at all. And number 2, they show it where he's just like moving the shifter knob. It's like, you just drive, dude.
So he shifts from the second gear past the drive, and at the end of the cut, you can see he goes into neutral. So he's just revving that engine at the end of that quote-unquote shift. What's turkey nuggets? It's Jimmy Crack Corn. I'm trying out new intros over here.
And he doesn't care.
Bienvenue a noodle to the Just Play It podcast. We are back. My actual name is James, and sitting across the virtual table from me about, how far away are you? 3,000 miles? 2,000 miles?
I don't know geography, James, but I am Nick. Howdy, folks.
Saying hola from 2 time zones away. It's my best friend, Nick. And we're coming at you with a movie that includes a household name, an iconic car, and it's from the 1980s.
What more could you ask for?
No, it's not Back to the Future. It's not Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It's the unknown movie called The Wraith.
From 1986.
Nick, have you ever heard of this movie?
I had never heard of this film before we did this.
I don't know where this came across on my algorithm. I was perusing YouTube. I can't recall if it was doing any kind of research for this podcast and obscure movies, but a random clip came online and it caught my attention, and it was a scene from this movie, and I kind of read the log line, or not just like a description of the movie, a plot summary. It had something to do with Charlie Sheen, and he comes back from the dead, but he's a killer car. So I thought, is this going to be like a Kit situation from Knight Rider? I thought he was going to be a talking car. I saw this clip, and it's the scene where the engine's being shown off and Clint Howard's there, and I'm like, hey, it's that guy. And I'm just like, what is this movie? I have to watch this.
It was a great excuse, because this is going to be a damn adventure, my friend. So let's get into it.
This movie is directed by Mike Marvin, who doesn't really have any other credits that I necessarily recognize or pop out. But this does star the always winning Charlie Sheen. In addition, the antagonist of this movie is Nick Cassavetes. The love interest is Sherilyn Fenn. And frickin' Randy Quaid, not friend of the enemy of the state, enemy of the podcast, is in this movie.
Of the world, Randy Quaid shows up. I always have to remember that he actually had success in Hollywood before he turned into an insane person.
Before he was hiding out in Canadian hotels, he was very prevalent in Hollywood productions.
Might have been bigger than his brother, Dennis, at a certain point.
Dennis Quaid, you wish you can hold a candle to the legend that is Randy.
Well, think about it, because we have 1986 Randy Quaid, and he acted pretty, steadily through the 90s and all the way up to what we had watched a week or so ago in Pluto Nash.
Ugh.
Yeah, he had a strong presence in film for quite a while, but yeah, Randy Quaid's in here. Despite having guys like Charlie Sheen and Randy Quaid and having this being a car movie, which is usually more on the expensive end, this was a pretty small budget, but with the small budget, this was not a cult classic. It had a small return with it as well.
Yeah, I was trying to see what the distribution company was, and I'm seeing here that it was an independently made movie, which makes a lot of sense. On IMDb's page, it says it was estimated for $2.7 million for a budget, and the gross was $3.5 million worldwide. So small investment, small return, bit of an anomaly of a movie. Otherwise, I had no idea this movie existed.
We'll get into it a little bit more, but
Nick, there's a lot to break down here. A lot of unanswered questions. This movie is riddled with mystery, from where it came from to its actual plot points. Can you please read us that sweet, sweet logline?
I'd love to. In a small town in Arizona, a mysterious man/spirit descends from the sky and manifests in a sports car and targets a local violent road racing gang of motorheads headed by a ruthless bully who will do anything to get what he wants. That's a long log line.
I was about to say we get a little wordy with ours in our laughable log lines because we want to lay it all out there. But that's pretty damn long.
And I'd love to just start breaking it down because there's so much to get into. So what do you say, James?
We need to get into the driver's seat, open the gull wing door, and have it slowly retract down. Start our engines and enter what is simply known as plot talk. Plot talk. So we open up on this nighttime scenery of some desert location. There are these energy light things that fly through the desert. This intro looks like it is animation.
I thought it was animation at first. It melts a road sign.
I was going to say that might be CGI, but pretty bad CGI if it is. But the lights flying through the roads and over the highway, that's definitely the superimposed. I forget what the technique is, but basically animation. You're taking a photo and animators are drawing over it.
Yeah.
So these lights are flying down these roads, and there's 4 lights, and they converge into one at an intersection, and boom, we get this image of the main mythical car in this movie that's featured, which is a Dodge Turbo Interceptor. And this car kind of has some convoluted history. I was trying to look it up. Like, was this a production car? Was this only made for the movie? What I can find, and it's really ambiguous history, is that this was built by Dodge to be a pace car for like the Indy 500 series. So just like a specialized car, somehow it made its way into this movie. And I don't know who got it. I don't know who found it from the production side, but this car that was built for the track ended up being the hero car in this movie.
Yes.
For the time of 1986, it looks really futuristic, like a spaceship on 4 wheels.
I thought it had a little bit of Acura NSX vibes.
I could see that.
In the very sleek, very low to the ground, very sleek. The tail and the body were a little higher, but kind of that thought. I'm sure when like in '91 when the NSX drops, it looks. You look at it, you're like, wow, that's a future car.
It's a little bit more curvy than the angular NSX. I don't want to
definitely. That's just the vibe I had when I saw it. I was like, yeah, it's a little NSX-y.
Hey,
anyway,
in a past life, I may have called myself a gearhead. I feel like I've kind of fallen off the train. I'm not really up on the new production models and the current brands of turbochargers and rims and all that, tires. Me and Nick actually worked at the same tire shop. Not the same time, unfortunately, but Nick is very versed in tires. This dude knows tires. He knows his rubber.
It's something I know. To be honest with you, it almost looks a little bit like the new Tesla Cybertruck, if you've seen it. It definitely has those vibes to it. Yeah. Very simplistic, sleek. Yeah.
Kind of going for the same and like the same mission behind its production. Like back in the 80s, I'm sure they were thinking, we want to make this cutting edge and look futuristic. And what does Elon Musk do with the Cybertruck? I want to make it look
cutting
out
edge
of this
and
world and futuristic.
Yeah. It's like a spaceship. That's where my head first went. I thought these were aliens. I thought this was an alien thing.
Right.
Like, okay. Aliens in the desert.
And when we get into it later, there's a race car driver that is a mystery that drives this car. And it same thing. It does feel like an alien entity. But
yes.
I think the original model was like an inline-4 engine, and it was a Cosworth engine. If you don't know what Cosworth is, it's a British company that makes engines. Of course, as we all know in Fast and Furious 6, the car Brian drives, the blue car, during the highway tank scene is a Ford Escort Cosworth. So the original car has got the status. It's got some sick stuff on it. It's an inline-4. It's twin turbocharged. But this movie version, I believe, a lot of it was just the shell. Racing movies will do this a lot. They'll just get a shell of a exotic car and put it on a chassis of like a dune buggy or a Pontiac Fiero or some sort of common car that can handle high speeds and for super affordability.
Yeah. And not to get into the weeds too much, but you mentioned this was a pace car, and auto companies will still do this in today's world that have pace cars. They'll basically a new design that's going to come out in a year, couple years. They'll take the shell, put it on an existing chassis with an existing motor. It's not the actual prototype of the car. And they'll throw it out as a pace car for marketing to try and build some hype. Ford did this a lot in NASCAR. That when they redesigned the Camry, they had that as a pace car, or not the Camry, sorry. When Toyota redesigned the Camry, they did it a lot. And then when Ford redesigned the Ford Focus, they did it a lot. They threw it out as a pace car
or like
with
that,
just
was it
the
the
shell.
Fusion?
Yep, and they did the Fusion, and they'll just slap the name and the logo on it on this, like you said, a fiberglass shell, and run it out there.
It's a selling point. So Dodge, of course, was like, "Oh, you want to put our car in a movie? Absolutely, we will lend it to you. We'll send you a couple
Product
shells.
placement, baby.
We will send you the molds to make shells." So, not to get too nerdy about the gearhead side of things. So, let's.
It is a car movie.
It is a car movie. It is that is like the main appeal. I see you have a note about the music. This movie's got some kick-ass music, but at this flying light scene, it is a score, and it's very synthy and it's very 80s.
It's super 80s, and all the music in this film is super 80s. There's some Ozzy Osbourne in here as well. There's just a lot of 80s
Billy
hair
Idol.
band sort of music. And again, like you said, the scores are very synthy. Otherwise, every scene where someone's driving a car, it's just 80s rock, man. This movie is such a sign of the times.
I believe it opens up with "Where's the Fire" by Tim Feehan.
Yes.
And it closes with that song too. And I don't know if this song was made for this movie or if it was affordable enough to play it twice and they just wanted to kind of make it the unofficial theme in this movie, but shit slaps.
So that's the intro, so we kind of get
so
this.
You're really wrapped up in the whole tone of this movie. And we're here, we learn that this is Arizona, it's the highway. There's a guy driving his car at night with his girlfriend, and these headlights show up behind him. The girlfriend's like, "Who are those people?" And he runs into a roadblock of two other cars. Turns out this is a malicious street racing gang who terrorizes motorists on the highways of Arizona.
And they stop him and they start harassing him. And the guy basically says, "What do you want? You want money, whatever." And at this point, the gang, led by Nick Cassavetes' character, Packard, who's going to be our main antagonist, looks and he's like talking to this guy's girlfriend. He goes, "We wanted something a little more pink." And I thought this was a rape
I thought it was a vagina joke.
right off the bat.
And have the audience go, "Oh."
Yes. Oh.
But then they go, "Oh, we think your car's pink slip will be very valuable." And the audience is like, "Oh, okay."
It's not rape. So for those of you who don't know, when you sign away your car, when you sell your car, I'm not sure if it's still this way, but it used to be a pink slip.
A literal piece of pink paper.
You know, you have like a piece of yellow paper over the pink paper. It's, I don't know what it's called, but those double pieces of paper.
Are you talking about like carbon paper?
Carbon paper, thank you. Yeah, and with the pink slip on the bottom.
Yeah, so a lot of street racing movies, they reference this. They say, "Oh, you want to race for pinks?" That essentially means the winner gets the loser's car.
Yep.
So this gang forces unwilling and unwanting motorists to race for pinks if they like your car. I think this guy has like a Ford Thunderbird.
Daytona, they call it.
Yeah, maybe it was a Thunderbird Daytona. Maybe it's just a Ford Daytona. And the main bully, Packard, who I am wondering if they named Todd Packard after from The Office. That's Dave Koechner's character from The Office. His name is Todd Packard. So that'd be such a wild connection if they named Todd Packard after this Packard.
Hollywood's like that. It could be.
Because this guy is such an over-the-top 80s bully villain. It is incredible.
It goes deeper than that, though. And we'll we'll dive on top of that. But essentially, this scene's not too important. The guys race, and Packard wins after basically running this other guy off of the road.
He does pull a Dom Toretto in Fast and Furious 4 when he has to smack into Brian to win the race. He cheats.
The guy's upset. He's like, "You cheated." Packard pulls out a switchblade, or I guess technically it's a stiletto because it pops out from the bottom, but basically says, "I win, get the fuck out of here." I don't think if the other guy won, he would have got his car anyway. These street pirates don't play by rules. And that scene establishes our antagonist, Packard, and his gang of street pirates,
Misfits,
or whatever the heck we want to call them. Misfits.
This is quite the collection of characters. There's one guy named Skank who is a tweaker, and his buddy boy, Gutter Boy.
Gutter Boy.
Right. So Skank is kind of like the sidekick to Packard. There are two other background crew members, but they're kind of like the Leon of the group. Of course, I am alluding to The Fast and the Furious, the original one.
Yeah, one of them's name is Minty. I only know that because of the credits.
Minty and Augie were kind of like the background crew members.
Yes, very much
so. To break it down real quick, Packard is the main leather jacket wearing bad guy. He's the tallest of the group. He runs the group. Skank is a muscle t-shirt, muscle vest wearing guy who rocks a lot of face makeup and a mohawk. Apparently he is drinking, it looks like Pepto-Bismol out of this bottle that is labeled hydraulic fluid. So I don't know if he's drinking hydraulic fluid.
I think he's sniffing it.
He was definitely drinking it. He was huffing.
Could have been drinking.
He was huffing like some sort of knockoff WD-40
like
later in the movie. So this guy obviously has some chemical addiction problems. And you thought this guy was something. You ain't seen nothing until you seen Gutter Boy. He is
a problem.
He's the tweaker's tweaker.
He's a liability. I don't know why this gang keeps him around.
So if Skank is the sidekick to Packard, and if you double the negative qualities of Skank, you are produced with Gutter Boy, who has got dirtier teeth.
He's just always dirty in general. His face is always dirty. His hair is greasy.
I really don't like it. He's really dirty, and he's really tweaky, and he's very vulnerable, but also a problem at the same time.
You want to feel bad for him, but you don't. And then there's the two background bad guys. A gang of people that you just don't want to run into, especially on a deserted highway. We transitioned into a daytime shot of some rolling highway of Charlie Sheen riding on a motorcycle. And he kind of rolls up on this random house with this random girl who turns out to be Sherilyn Fenn. And she plays the love interest of Carrie. Spelled Keri. For those at home. Now, Charlie Sheen's character, Jake, he rides into this small town. He's on his dirt bike, and he's just got the denim jacket, no shirt. When I say this is 80s, it is 80s.
I was going to say, Charlie Sheen is rocking double denim, open chest.
There's a lot of this in this movie.
Yeah, so he rolls up, and there's like a lot of two-name introductions. He's like, "I'm Jake Casey," and she's like, I'm Carrie, whatever. And then later on, we meet another character. He's like, "Hey, I'm Billy Hankins," and it's like just such an 80s thing.
And Jake speaks to Carrie, and immediately they have this connection. I think Carrie thinks he's hot. Jake has game, and he's basically like, "Hey, jump on the back of my motorcycle." I don't know where they're going to go, but jump on the back of my motorcycle. There's no concept of stranger danger here. But we hear a car revving, and she goes, "I can't go." But it turns out it's Packard who shows up. And we learn that Packard is essentially a psychopath who is very possessive of Carrie. We learned that very early where he's like, "Hey, you're mine. You're not allowed to talk to other guys." And you're like, "Oh, okay. He's just kind of a very possessive
trying
person.
To assert dominance in his first scene of a different male in the mix.
Yes.
Carrie basically shoos off Jake, and Jake drives off. And he's like, "All right, another time." And then Packard picks up Carrie. He's like, "Who was that?" And she's like, crap. So the next scene, we go into the local teen hangout spot. I think this was a note you wrote down. You wrote down, how old are these people? Because I don't know if
I have no idea.
It is not apparent. It's very vague. I don't know if it seems like
I feel like they're high schoolers.
It would appear that they are high schoolers based on their behavior and their maturity level.
And the fact that Carrie basically lives in the suburbs. She can't afford that house. She has to have parents who live in these suburbs.
And a couple of them work at a burger joint. So you're thinking, okay, these are teenagers who have a part-time job and maybe they go to school. Maybe this is summer. I don't know.
That's what I'm saying. I have no reference for how old these folks are.
Yeah.
I think they're high schoolers, but they have a lot more freedom. There's never an adult other than the police force in this town.
Our next scene brings us to this kind of desert river. I don't know. I'm not an Arizonian. We're both from California. So like the hangout spot would be going to the beach. Nick, you're in Tennessee. So what do you got out there these days?
We got lakes.
Yeah, right. So a lot of states have lakes. Apparently in Arizona, it's a rocky river.
But they lay on the rocks like it's the beach. Like they're sunning on rocks. Like they're some sort of gecko. Also, Carrie and Packard show up in like full normal clothes. Packard's wearing like white pants and a leather cutoff vest with no shirt. And then we cut away and then we cut back and they're in beach clothes. Because they look at Carrie and all of a sudden she looks really hot in a bathing suit. And I'm like, when did she put that on?
She put on the red bikini.
She had like boots and a sundress on.
Forget it, Nick. It's Arizona. They don't acknowledge daylight savings time, so they ain't got time for that. And neither do we.
That's fair.
Charlie Sheen and his character of Jake are also at this location. And he's laying down on some rocks. And this is what I was alluding to earlier, the super 80s introductions to characters. This guy shows up. He's like, hey, buddy, you mind if I lay down next to you? And this character ends up being the character of Billy. And he's like, I'm Billy Hankins. Nice to meet you. I work down at Big K's Burgers.
If you ever need a burger, just stop on by.
Hey, you should hit me up in case you ever need a burger. It's such a trope of 80s movies. They're just like, we got to
spoon feed you.
First and last name. What's your occupation? So Jake is staring at Carrie,
who's now in a bikini.
And then Billy is like, oh, that's Carrie. My brother used to be really close to her.
Can I lay out the basically the main driving plot here that Billy explains? So this movie's supposed to have a twist at some point, but Billy just gives the game away right off the bat. So Billy lays out these 3 points, and I'll let you as the audience try to put this together, okay? Billy shares that Packard is a psychopath who will kill anybody who looks at Carrie. Then he says, I know Carrie, but my brother was really good friends with her. Also, my brother was killed recently, mysteriously, and we have no idea who did it. 2 + 2 + 2 is 6, my friend. He never suspects that Packard is the psycho who killed his brother for hanging out with Carrie because he kills people who hang out with Carrie. And he knows all this information.
And we learn later that his brother, whose name is Jamie, was killed off a highway. Now, we already know the street racing gang operates where?
The highway. They are road warriors.
Speaking of, I'm just going to throw in a little fun fact here. So the director, Mike Marvin, he did say that Mad Max 2, and this movie called High Plains Drifter were the inspiration for his movie of The Wraith. So talk about a smooth transition from last week to this week.
Not even planned. We're just that good at what we do. And we get a flashback to Jamie's murder. And Jamie wasn't just friends with Carrie, he was banging Carrie.
Literally.
On the DL.
In the act.
And then he's ripped off of Carrie after these goons come into the room and obviously kill him.
We're like, oh, who are these guys?
And after all this goes down, Packard ends up meeting up with Gutter Boy and Skank and tells them to keep an eye on Jake and make sure he stays away from Carrie. And if he wants to know everything that Jake does in relation to Carrie. At this point, we realize Carrie is a prisoner
of Packard. And that's made very clearly in some dialogue at this river scene where she says, you think you own me, like I'm your private property. And he just cuts her off. He's like, you are. Nobody loves you as much as I do. If you're not going to be my girl, you're not going to be anybody's. And you're just like, whoa.
How'd you not know he killed your brother, Billy?
You got to get that big burger brain intact.
Speaking of burgers, we cut to this 80s drive-in diner called Big K's, where Billy is the cook.
He's the cook, and Carrie works as this is like a Sonic's, like a rollerblade service, like, or
drive-up diner kind of
drive-up diner. It's
deal.
a super small structure, and waitresses, waiters on roller skates bring you your burgers. I love this. I never had this as a teenager. I would love to have this experience.
I would, if there was a joint close to me that had this, that wasn't called Sonic, I would go.
And this is where we're kind of going on that, like, maybe it's a teen movie, college age. Don't know.
Carrie wants to go home, and we kind of know why. She wants to be out of public in case Packard shows up. And so she wants Billy to drive her home. So Billy jumps in his Triumph, sweet old car, but it's kind of a jalopy at this point in the game. It's broken down, and he starts driving off with Carrie in the passenger seat, and who shows up?
The frickin' street racing gang.
Dickhead himself.
And the dickhead's like, oh, nice car. I should take that off your hands. Why don't we race for it? That's their go-to move. They're like, hey, you have something on four wheels?
We'll see this later, but they're addicted to the race.
These guys are married to the streets. And then this is where we get our first introduction to the, in real life, Wraith car, which of course we know is a Dodge, but they don't know what it is back in the day. Packard's like, he's talking to Rughead. We haven't even introduced him yet. He is Clint Howard, which we all know as Ron Howard's brother, who has literally been in hundreds of movies and TV shows as a character actor. Steady work, side character. He's like, oh, I don't know what it is, but we should add it to our collection. So the gang says, hey, screw your Triumph. I want to go chase down this car. This car looks sick. They go up to this random portion of a highway, and the races, all these races are very insinuated. It's like a mutual understanding. Like, so to paint the picture, the burger joint's on the side of a highway. There's a bunch of cars around it. There's a bunch of people around it. And this Wraith pulls up and revs its engine and then peels out. And the street racing gang takes that as oh, okay, the challenge is on. And then they somehow know where to go to this isolated portion of this highway. The Wraith is already sitting on one lane, ready to race. No one else is around. And then the gang rolls up, and the character of Augie, he's like, oh, let me take this guy. I want to race him. Let me take this one, Packard.
Yeah, this gang is lawless, except when it comes to drag racing. Then it's nothing but rules. They're like, oh, show up. This is protocol. Okay, it's weird. You think they just kill somebody and take their car. So Augie's going to race him.
And can I point something out?
Absolutely.
There's a lot of interesting things this gang says.
Mm-hmm.
First off, I need to go back to skank at the river scene. There's a lot. I don't know if these are 80s terms or if they're just like drughead terms, but he's checking out all the ladies at the river, and he says, oh, there's a lot of duck butter out by the lake.
I've never heard that term before.
Except he says it as like, there's a lot of duck butter out at the lake.
A lot of duck butter out at the lake today, Pack.
Quiff City, here I come.
Now, Augie, as he's about to race this mystery character in this futuristic looking car, he says, I'll burn this Iranian.
I'll burn this Iranian.
It's so random. Did they assume that this guy was Iranian?
Again, sign of the times, man. The 80s, I think, just had some lingo. There were a few far outs that were thrown out there.
Did they just like assume this car was like from the Middle East? It's a Dodge. It obviously has a Dodge logo. It has a Chrysler logo actually on it.
It does. I noticed that.
A little 5-point star there. And then Packard's like, yeah, man, you show him how to do it. Augie style.
Do it to him, Augie style.
And then Rughead, Clint Howard, comes out and once again starts the race. Emily pointed this out. She says, this is a refreshing take on the hot girl starting the race that we see so often in street racing movies.
That's a bit of a jab at Clint Howard, but I'll allow it.
I mean, he is no Rita Ora. I'll say that.
Fair.
All I'm saying is spread the love on who starts the race. Can I say something about the racing?
Absolutely.
The racing scenes are very underwhelming.
It's so underwhelming. I feel like they reuse a lot of shots.
I feel like we are car people. you and I both obviously love action movies. I am partial, like I've said 5 times in this singular episode, to the Fast and Furious franchise. I loved the first 6 that came out. I was talking about this last week with Mad Max. I thought the editing during the car chase scenes were so captivating. This movie, complete opposite. And like we said before, we thought this was a outer space vehicle, and we thought it was going to kind of have some supernatural elements, but this Wraith is just keeping pace with the Pontiacs and the Dodges and the Corvettes. There's a lot of like static back and forth shots. You did discover something in this, and speaking of the editing.
Yeah, so we have this cut that you see in a lot in racing scenes and films of guys shifting the shifter knob. You don't race in an automatic transmission.
It's a 0.6 second cut.
Where he's just like moving the shifter knob. It's like, you just drive, dude.
In automatics, there is the park, reverse, neutral, drive, and second gear, first gear.
Yeah.
The second and first gear are when you're climbing a hill. So he shifts from the second gear past the drive, and at the end of the cut, you can see he goes into neutral.
It's just such an oversight. Those are just little things that I picked up on automatically. No pun intended.
There's a couple things that this movie, made in 1986, thought was going to be overlooked, but little did they know people in the 2020s would be watching on streaming and would be able to pause and rewind.
Say, hey, wait a second.
The Wraith, meanwhile, in this race, he zooms away, and Augie, by the way, he's rocking a crop top. We didn't even mention that.
Not much to mention.
He's got the crop top. He's got the jacket. So in my notes, I just wrote crop top catches up, but the Wraith is actually parked perpendicular to the highway. Crop top Augie, he tries to slam on the brakes. Apparently no one has ABS. And he just crashes straight through the Wraith, and it explodes. He goes flying off a cliff.
You see it? The way he went sailing right out there?
Fiery heap.
He just went sailing out there.
Same thing like you were saying, the quick cuts of like you thought we wouldn't notice. There's a couple cuts when he is quote unquote flying off the cliff, but it's clearly just this actor in the stationary car jiggling the steering wheel like he's falling off.
Yeah, quick cuts aren't always your friend.
So this guy flies off the cliff and dies.
Naturally, as you would when you fly off a cliff in a fiery steel death trap. And the police show up, led by Lieutenant Loomis.
This is where we are introduced to the character of Randy Quaid.
Loomis here, he's been trying to catch these street racers for a while. Don't know why it's taking him so long. These guys seem pretty out and about with what they're doing. And we see the mystery driver, the guy we saw from the opening scene, in this pretty futuristic, almost spacesuit looking thing. He's standing up on the rocks behind the freeway. No one else sees him, or the highway. And they find out that Augie's body is still intact after going through this fiery explosion, but his eyeballs are missing.
Well, it's funny because when the cops show up, they drive up to the cliff where he drove off of, and the cops are pretty nonchalant. They're just like, call the meat wagon. Someone else says, it's Augie Fisher. I'm like, they identified this fool from this wrecked, burnt, exploded car.
Turns out his body was fully intact.
The ambulance guy shows Augie to Loomis. Like you said, he is not burnt. He is completely fine, but he is missing his eyes. Meanwhile, none of the gang really seem too torn up about one of their fellow members taking the fall. Augie's dead. Crop top Augie. He's out. And no one really seems to care, especially Packard.
Because he's a sociopath. And we cut back to the mysterious racer, and he has these like braces on his arms and legs, and the brace on his arm just like disappears. And we don't really quite know what that means. But Packard and Carrie end up driving away from the scene, and Packard does this weird blood pact shit.
Well, before he does that, so Augie, who has been I'm just going to assume maybe a 5-year friend minimum. I mean, maybe he was a childhood friend of Packard, but I'll say he knew Augie for 5 years. So Augie flies off the cliff. He does not care. Carrie, being a rational human being, is crying and showing human emotion because someone that they knew and loved just passed away. And Packard is like, quit crying. Now tell me why you were with Billy earlier today.
He's a psycho.
He's hell-bent on just like, why are you hanging out with these other men? And Carrie's like, dude, one of your friends just died.
And he does this thing where he's like, hey, if once you stop caring, you don't feel anything. Then he like puts the knife in his hand and he basically squeezes the knife with his hand. And then he pulls the knife out, just like slicing his hand open. Then he like tries feeding his blood to Carrie.
Carrie is a hostage.
It's fucking weird, man. Carrie's like, I will never love you. Packard says, well, we'll see about that. Which is not something you ever want to hear from somebody after you say, I don't love you. That's about as bad as it gets.
Speaking about how bad it gets, we get to this wooden shack looking warehouse on the outside, but on the inside, it's a super sick garage. And this is the gang's
I love this garage
hangout lair. And I got to say, this just turned into a horror movie. So it was a little bit sci-fi in the beginning, a little bit teenage drama, coming age as well. And then we get to the dead body, the missing eyes. And then this scene, the Racer X in the all black racing suit. We don't know who this fool is. He's got wires kind of coming out of his sleeves and down his legs, like you alluded to earlier. And he comes in with some sort of space shotgun.
Yep. The space shotgun's the only way to describe it.
We're back to sci-fi. This alien's coming in with a space shotgun. Everyone is reacting naturally about this mystery man in a mask coming in with a firearm, and he starts shooting up the place. Packard, meanwhile, completely calm. Packard just staring down this suspect with a firearm.
Doesn't care.
This is where I was like, okay, he is a true psychopath. He does not care about his gang's life. He doesn't care about his own life. He's literally letting this guy with the shotgun come in and point it at his head. And he's like, what you gonna do? Dude, Packard is fucking based.
Yeah, and one of the guys, Rughead, we get a very sudden flash of the eyes of Racer X here. And Rughead basically recognizes and goes, oh my God, that's Jamie Hankins. It's basically the guy we killed.
Except for the audience, it hangs on this cheesy freeze frame of Charlie Sheen underneath the helmet.
So the Racer X shoots up the place and then disappears.
Skank has another really good line. He has a lot of good lines. He has my favorite lines in this movie. So Packard, yeah, he's pretty psycho. He's not phased. Skank is he's up in the rafters. He climbed up because he was frightened for his life. And Gutter Boy's like, who was that guy? And Skank says, I don't know. But whoever he was, he's weird and pissed off.
But whoever he was, he's weird and pissed off.
That's one way to describe it. And we cut to the next day. We're back at the drive-in diner. And at this point, Packard gets a note that says, go to Lookout Mountain for another race. Is there a more 80s location than Lookout Mountain?
Hold on. I have another quote via subtitles that I wrote down.
Yes.
This one's from Gutter Boy. Trigger warning. This is a not PC sentence. Gutter Boy says, we'll beat him like a red-headed stepchild.
You never heard that phrase before?
Oh, no. Is that a phrase?
It's a very common phrase, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I don't
like a red-headed stepchild? Yeah, it's a very, very, very common phrase.
I don't approve.
Oh, you don't have to approve. I'm just letting you know. I've heard that one a ton of times in my life.
Yeah, there's a lot of questionable things that this gang says.
Yeah, they use a lot of slurs as well. They're edgy.
They're all about being psychopaths. So Packard gets a handwritten note on his steering wheel that says, yeah, meet me on Lookout Mountain Road. Loomis is there getting a burger, and he sees the whole gang pull out and drive away. He's like, okay, here we go. The action's starting. I'm going to go follow this gang. There's another hilarious ass quote from Packard when they're about to pull away from this diner. He's like,
hey, Carrie, I'll pick you up later tonight, so do yourself a favor and be here.
No, it was definitely a quote where you're like, oh, he'll kill her if she's not there.
Do yourself a favor and be here.
Again, if it's not clear to you that Carrie is a prisoner of this man, it should be very obvious by this point.
He's on Lookout Mountain Road. Let's go.
And we get to, is it the Letterman jacket guy that now races the Wraith?
Yeah, this guy is Minty. He's another one of the background characters of the squad here. And so he's now going to avenge the death of Augie, so he's going to race. And just before the race begins, the cops show up, but they get the race off. Rughead starts the race just in time. As you said, as far as being underwhelmed by these race scenes, it's essentially the same race scene as Augie, and it's the exact same fate that Augie suffers. The Interceptor pulls away, turns perpendicular to the road, causes an explosion.
In this scene, this is where you can see the Dodge Wraith is rigged with a frame. It has some sort of mount underneath it, and it's holding the car down on the street. And you can kind of see the wiring for the explosive rig. Super 80s. There's also a couple inside the car shots of the race scenes where you can see the camera lens reflect off the window.
It's very sloppy.
Very indie vibe.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah.
After Minty's car blows up, Interceptor's fine, drives off. The cops chase him.
And we do need to say this. The Interceptor does it rematerializes itself after each explosion. And every time someone dies, there is this body brace. It glows and vanishes.
We still don't know why. But the Wraith car, the Interceptor's getting chased down by the cops. And the cops chase him into a roadblock they have set up across a bridge. But then the Wraith just decides to ram through the roadblock of cop cars, gets away, and then basically explodes into a bunch of fireworks and just disappears.
And then when the Wraith disappears, it is on the same rolling highway on that first shot that we saw.
Yes. There's only about 5 different locations on freeways or highways that they end up shooting on. And as every great 80 movies goes, you have to end up going back to the hub of the movie, which is this drive-in diner.
The burger spot. We're back at Big K's. Billy and Carrie look up. They see shooting stars, kind of alluding to the beginning of these flying lights coming down from the sky, flying over the highway. And Jake, on his motorcycle, he quietly rolls up. And Carrie even says, that this thing's quiet.
Came out of nowhere.
And then we get into a whole scene with Skank and Gutter Boy. Their job is to watch out for Carrie and make sure she's not hanging out with anybody, especially if it's this new mysterious character of Jake, Charlie Sheen. There's a whole chase scene. Skank.
I have to bring up something to the chase scene. Yeah.
Okay, I was going to say
you're going to go there.
Skank gives Gutter Boy a shotgun, or he says, "Hey, grab the shotgun."
What about the girl, Greg? We can't just grab the shotgun, Mama Luca. The shotgun!
And I am getting huge Rick and Morty vibes.
I don't know nothing about no shotgun! Just grab the goddamn gun, man! Gun! Oh, Jake! Why do you keep doing this to us?
Pull the trigger! Do it! Do it, motherfucker! Pull the trigger!
He tells Gutter Boy to shoot the tires out of a dirt bike. It's like, you don't shoot tires out of a dirt bike. You destroy the whole back end of it. And instead of shooting at the car, Gutter Boy shoots the passenger. Dude, I don't even know.
No, okay. He shoots through the floorboard
of the passenger side.
And then Skank's like, "You destroyed the steering."
You don't have to know a lot about cars to know that there's nothing underneath the passenger floorboard that could disable the steering of a vehicle.
All the linkage is on the driver's side, funny enough, for the steering.
Through the steering column. This goes back to the shifting of the automatic. All you had to do was have one mechanic on set who would have been like, "Nah, you can't say that."
Mike Marvin would have been like, "See me in the editing room, bitch."
And yet, no, these guys just write it in there and act it out as if, yeah, that makes sense. Somebody needs to just hire me to read through a script and go, "Nope, that's dumb."
Speaking of a stupid problem, Skank huffs WD-40, or at least what is a knockoff of WD-40. And I'm wondering, how is this guy tolerating all these chemicals in his body?
I don't think he is. Functioning's a high word there to use.
Bring up something with Skank. He has multiple different versions of face paint. So I think he does have this kind of road warrior face paint when he's patrolling the highways. And when he is just, going to fetch burgers at Big K's, he kind of has just eyeliner on. But Skank and his choices of when he decides to wear face makeup seems to be dependent on what he's doing. When he's on the road pirating, makeup over the eyes with different colored hair, mohawks. And then when he's just relaxing, going to get some food or hanging out with the gang, contemplating some murders. He's just eyeliner.
Dress for the job you want, not the one you have. Jake and Carrie get away from this chase, obviously, after Gutter Boy shoots out the steering from the passenger side floorboards, and they get back to Carrie's house and they share a kiss. Jake says this phrase, "It's been a while," after they kiss. And that's the first clue the movie drops that Jake is basically the reincarnate body of Jamie Hankins, who was murdered, who was her love and was killed by Packard's gang. And then he does this thing where he tells Carrie to stand up to Packard. Like, you need to stand up to him.
Carrie is also just happy to kiss this person she does not know because he is not a possessive psychopath that is Packard.
It's a very abrupt growth of love after sharing maybe 20 words with this individual. But I'm shocked he says stand up to Packard because Packard will murder her. This guy's not going away. Like, Jake makes it sound like if you stand up to him, he'll go away. This dude he's not going anywhere.
Speaking of not going anywhere, Packard is crying and smoking a ciggy in his car watching this happen.
Yeah, he's cucked for sure, this whole scene.
Later, the Wraith actually just lowers from the sky. It appears behind Packard, and it has a 10-foot distance from Packard, and he rams him into next week, straight into a graveyard.
I don't know if this was a real graveyard. I thought maybe it's a metaphorical graveyard, but Skank and Gutter Boy are there, so this seems like a very real scene. And there's just this graveyard in the middle of the suburb.
Yeah, he rams him into this movie set of a graveyard, and then the Wraith Racer appears from behind a gravestone, which has the name Packard Walsh on it. A little bit of symbolism or foreshadowing.
Yeah, the Wraith is basically calling out his victims at this point.
The Wraith car rear ends Packard into this graveyard, and then the race car Wraith driver appears from behind this gravestone. Once again, Packard is not fazed by this race car driver's magical abilities.
Nah.
Skank and Gutter Boy are. Does he have like telekinesis? Because Skank pulls out the shotgun, and then it's like an Elmer Fudd cartoon.
Backfire, yeah.
Like exploding barrel. Again, he's like, oh my God, this thing is not from Earth.
Packard goes, he's just a kid. You're like, I don't know, man. And then we get to the next day where Jake and Carrie are like basically out on a date. They're back to that river, lake, watering hole beach thing where no one else is around. Carrie brings up Jamie's death, and we get another flashback scene.
Yeah, a little bit more clear cut of the flashback, and we do see that it is Packard and the gang, and Packard has a switchblade, and he starts cutting the back of Jamie, and then we go back in the present day, and we see that Jake has very similar scars on his back.
And to the audience now,
we're not that stupid.
Jamie is Jake, Jake is Jamie.
So they're back at the headquarters.
The garage hideout.
The super sick garage, and then Rughead says, oh, I'm out. Like, this gang thing was all fun and games, and it's cool, but now that this Wraith appeared, I'm out. And then Skank's like, what do you mean? And Rughead's like, a Wraith, a ghost, an evil spirit. So Ruggs dips.
So Ruggs leaves. As he's leaving, the Interceptor shows up, goes full speed ahead into the hideout, kamikazes the hideout, blows it the fuck up.
To Kingdom Come.
With Skank and Gutter Boy inside.
One of Skank's last line. I do have another subtitle pull here. Let me know if you know what he's trying to say. So they're working on a car, and he says, slosh this pig with 15, bud. Let's go cruise. Scare up some poozle someplace.
Sounds like he says, load up the car. We're going to go get some poon.
That's pretty much what I got, actually. So
he's trying to pick up some ladies.
Bravo. But no poon to be gotten today because the Wraith comes in. He's like coming in hot, and it blows this garage up.
Is the Wraith car affected? Of course not. And it drives off right past Rughead, and Rughead is shook. Man, I talk about this all the time in movies review. All I want is for characters to respond appropriately to situations. And Rughead is the only guy in this film who is appropriately responding to what's going on here.
And Carrie.
Kind of Carrie.
But she's kind of also, she's still in that hostage mode.
Carrie has this weird 80s chick. Not her fault, it's just the way the character was written and the way she acts it. But it's very, I don't know. Well,
Well, it's funny because Emily actually made a comment. She said, "Why do all women talk like that in old movies?" Like,
it's just the 80s chick thing, man.
I'm Carrie. Nice to meet you.
It's the 80s chick in movies, yeah.
I don't think that's a good idea. It's like, no, you should say, I don't think it's a good idea, Packard.
It's just the character. So the only one, in my opinion, the only one who's being rational in their response is Rughead.
Well, speaking of Carrie, she is abducted straight from work by Packard. He picks her up.
Oh my gosh.
And says, with no plan, he's like, we're going to California.
So as he takes Carrie, Billy says, what are you doing? Billy tries to stop him after Packard invokes his dead brother. And Billy tries fighting him, gets his ass kicked. And James, this was a complaint of yours, I know, from Stealth, where you said, this guy's evil. Why isn't anyone standing up? They're all complicit. Billy gets his ass kicked, and then he stands up and looks at this whole crowd around him and basically calls them all cowards. Like, we have strength in numbers. We could kill this guy. Anybody with 2 brain cells to rub together knows that this guy is a murderer. He murdered my brother.
The patrons of Big K's Burgers are no better than the control room of the aircraft carrier in Stealth.
And Billy's the only one standing up, and I sympathize with him when he looked at everybody, and he's like, you just let this man abduct a woman in broad daylight, and you did nothing? Kudos to Billy.
Packard, with Carrie in the car, he's driving away. He's like, we're going to California. And then this is when Carrie takes Jake's advice of standing up to Packard, and she confronts Packard about the night of Jamie's murder. And she calls it out. She's like, it was you, wasn't it? And everybody in the audience is like, yeah.
I've known this for the last 55 minutes after Billy laid it out for me.
And Packard is so possessive of Carrie. And Carrie says she'd rather make stupid Creighton children with Gutter Boy than be with him. And that's saying something.
And this is where he's going to kill her.
And then Carrie's like, yo, kill me because I ain't loving you. And then boom, the Dodge Wraith shows up. Packard's like, see ya, leaves Carrie on the side of the highway. And again, the race is understood.
This is what I'm talking about. The rules of the race. The second the Interceptor showed up, he drops everything. He goes, all of his rage and anger subsides, and he goes, race.
He lives by the rules of the road. The race is on. It's understood. And again, this is the final showdown. It's very underwhelming. The race scenes are not it in this movie.
Dude, the cops are so uncoordinated in their pursuit, because half the cops are behind Packard chasing him, and then a 4 or 5 of them come from head on, and the cops just run into each other.
And then they just crash.
It's just a convenient way for the cops not to be there for the culmination of the race.
So the Wraith zips ahead and then turns around and then starts heading towards Packard in his Corvette. But we do see a POV from Packard's dashboard, and we see this Wraith, just the driver, the human.
Racer X.
Racer X stands in the middle of the road, and you can see Packard intent on running him over. Again, you're just like, this guy's a psycho murderer.
And so the cuts basically go, Packard's car, Interceptor, Racer X, Packard's car, Interceptor, Racer X, Packard. And it's just the 3 of them. And then the final one is just the 2 cars colliding with Racer X standing in the middle. And also, as we know, with the Interceptor, it has very, very, very explosive properties. And we just basically get this fiery explosion. And similar to the past victims, Packard is dead, but he's not burned to a crisp or mangled. His body's intact.
His eyes are closed, but we assume they're missing.
Yes.
Maybe they ran out of money to do the makeup of no eyes.
The cops show up, and Loomis just accepts he goes, this is the last guy of Packard's gang. Like, it's over.
Loomis essentially waltzes on up and says, classic. This whole gang's been picked off, and they're all naked and unfazed, not a scratch on them, and they're missing eyes, probably.
I mean, if you're Loomis, the Wraith pretty much solved a pretty big problem in your town. So
yeah, they were the biggest problem because, like that guy in the beginning, they raced the car for. Did he ever file a police report?
It appears not. That car never comes up again.
I feel like you would have such a strong case and say like, hey, like I was driving down the highway and then this gang approached me and forced me to race them because they were going to violate my girlfriend. So I felt under pressure and had to comply.
And at that point, you think the police department would be like, yeah, that's the street gang who's terrorizing our town currently.
Carrie, meanwhile, she's still in her Big K Burgers uniform. So she walked all the way home from where she was left on the highway.
And it's night now. So she walked all afternoon.
Carrie's coming off in like a 20-mile hike.
And the Interceptor pulls up to Carrie's house. A Racer X comes out. The suit basically through magic and electricity and pulses comes off. Reveals Charlie Sheen.
Jake.
You know who I am.
And Carrie just magically puts it all together that it's Jamie.
Jamie.
We don't know what magical forces caused this to happen. Never explained, but it has happened. And Jake says, this is basically the best I could do to become Jamie.
It's close enough.
Yeah, the super hot movie star Charlie Sheen. This is the best body I can come back in. Good Lord, if I died and I came back in a famous actor's body to my fiance, she'd be like, great.
The best I can do.
Your personality and this super hot body, this is great. I need to go get murdered by street gangs and just get an upgrade on this doughy body that I have.
Come back as a Dodge.
Yeah, why not? That's pretty sick. So now Jamie's in Jake's body forever now. I don't know what she's going to call him going forward, Jake or Jamie.
And there's one last order of business. He's got to go see his younger brother, Billy, at the burger shop. Billy's got a black eye. He's got a split lip. And Jake comes in and wants to comfort Billy. So he leaves the keys to the Dodge, the Wraith car, and says, hey, there's a car outside. It's all yours. And he's very vague with Billy. Billy says something like, oh, I can't believe this. Thank you, bro.
He says bro like 5 times in that scene.
And he's like, who are you? And then Charlie Sheen's like, you just said it, and kind of winks at him. So Charlie Sheen, as Jake Jamie, walks out, gets on his motorcycle, drives off.
Come back, bro!
And Billy's like, no, wait, Jake! Jamie! He starts crying. It's like, oh, he also put it together.
Yeah, puts it together really quick. Also, could we just understand that Jake/Jamie just gave his brother a really, what's referred to as a hot car.
An Iranian car.
It's been involved in a lot of crime and murder. Also, is this car magical?
Does very special things.
Was it one with Jake? Was it, is this like, I'll always be with you through this car?
We're going to get into that.
Okay, I'll leave that.
So we end on Jake, Jamie, and Carrie driving off on a dirt bike into the moonset. They don't ride off into the sunset. They ride into a moonset.
But Loomis sees them driving off, Lieutenant Loomis, and he puts it together magically and just goes, it's Jamie. It's the murder I never solved.
Why is he staking out Carrie's house?
I don't know, but at the end of the day, if you are the law in this town, you couldn't solve that murder by proving that Packard and his gang killed this kid. And then you're just like, oh, the kid came back and killed him himself. Cool. You just move on with it. Not a very satisfying ending, in my opinion, but here we are. And that's the movie.
That's Lieutenant Loomis for you. Classic.
Again, I don't know how old these kids are. Again, I assumed high school. So like Carrie just drives off with her boyfriend. Doesn't have parents. No one who cares about her in this town. She's just gone now.
Right. And then it got me wondering, so is Jake, Jamie, he has let Carrie in on what the truth is, but he left Billy in the dark.
It seems like a dick move.
And with Carrie, he's like, yeah, I'm Jamie.
Doesn't care about his brother.
Yeah, does the movie leave it at he never tells his brother who he is, but he tells Carrie who he is?
Is he going to be around for the holidays? I don't know, dude.
Well, that is the Wraith, and that wraps up plot talk.
Oh.
So I think we should just jump straight into our nitpicks here, which there may be a lot to cover, because this movie is quite the mystery. Nitpicks.
Yeah, basically my nitpicks are the overarching questions, which is why wouldn't he just come out as Jamie? Why this Jake character? Why did he have to pick these guys off one by one if he had this magical body and car? He could have done what he did to Skank and Gutter Boy. He could have just kamikazed that hideout of theirs off the bat and blown everybody up and been like, all right, that was a 30-second resolution. This is good. I don't understand the body braces disappearing off.
Yeah, and a nitpick I have is those unexplained things, and like, what's the thing with the no eyes and the non-burn victims after a car crash? It's never expanded upon. With all these questions in mind, Nick, I've kind of put together some sort of game, and as I was trying to research this movie and get a breakdown of it, I didn't really get any clear answers. So I think it's up to us at the Just Play It podcast to supply these answers, to break down these hard-hitting questions of what really happened in this ambiguous movie of The Wraith.
I'll do my best to answer, but goodness.
This is our breakdown of why things happen. So let's start out with the body braces. So after each accident, there's metal braces that are attached to this Racer X, this mystery character, and after each murder, they disappear. Now, I did scour the internet. I tried to find reasons and explanations, and the director was asked about this, and his answer was this: as the Wraith settles the score with members of Packard's gang and knocks them off one by one, he begins to get stronger and stronger. Then one more piece of what is supposed to be holding him together artificially begins to disappear. His crutches are then starting to vanish as he gets his satisfaction. Like, let's say that's true. The director says so. Now my question is, why were there braces in the first place? Let me walk you through it. The flashbacks, we see Packard's gang walk in on Carrie and Jamie having sexy time. Packard essentially wants Carrie because he's a sociopath. So, Nick, if I just spin a theory and break this down, what if I told you that Jamie didn't die from switchblade lacerations, but instead, I'm going to say there was more to this altercation. I'm going to say that they broke every single one of his limbs during that scene, and he was actually put into braces. So he didn't die at that scene, and this gang later runs into him, and there's the question of, is Jamie a car? Is he a ghost racer? Like, is he one with the car? Why did he come back as a racer? And we don't know. So to give the answer to the audience, here's my speculation. The gang broke all of his limbs, put him in braces. Later on, they run into Jamie again. He's wearing braces, and they put him in this Dodge. They put like a heavy rock or like a brick on a gas pedal and send this dude off a cliff while he's wearing braces, and then he blows up, and that's how he dies. And each murder does represent each gang member breaking one part of the limb. So that is the reason behind the braces, ladies and gentlemen.
I think you're doing a lot of heavy lifting for this movie, and I appreciate what you're trying to do. The issue with that theory, because I thought about it as well, it crossed my mind, but if that's the case, then how come Jake is fully functioning every time we see his character out in real life? If Jake is the car and Jake is Racer X, then why the hell every time we see him, he's out walking about, doing his thing, riding his motorcycle, he's not injured? If he showed up and had in a wheelchair or crutches,
hold up,
or something,
you're jumping ahead, because that's another question coming up on the big questions of these unanswered questions.
No, it goes right to your question. He's fully healthy. If you're going to show me symbolism, you have to tie it back to something.
Well, that's what I'm saying. There's nothing to tie it back to, so it's our job to make up reasons, because people want to know.
Do they?
Yes.
All right. The theory you have works. Again, I think you're doing a lot of heavy lifting for the movie. I would have loved to see, they got in a car accident the race is over, Minty's dead, his whole body's intact, except for he's missing his right arm. So he took his right arm back, right? He took his legs back. He took something from his victims that made him stronger.
Well, Nick, the whole point of this is we are trying to supply answers that aren't there.
I get it.
When people Google this movie and want answers, we are here to supply the answers. So
what I'm saying is there's no answer.
I'm giving a whole other backstory that was not there. Now, speaking of a backstory that was not there,
I understand that I'm being difficult. There's nothing that makes sense when you stick it into the canon of the film.
So, Nick, please explain to the audience, give your best theory of what is the meaning behind the missing eyes and the unmangled bodies.
Oh my God, I don't know. If I had to go with something, if I had to go, film student trying to find some symbolism that wasn't explained in the film, I would say everybody turned a blind eye in the town to the murder, right? They kind of forgot about it. They just went on.
Goes back to the patrons when they didn't defend Carrie. They all turned a blind eye.
And as far as the bodies being intact, if you're like, oh, we have to explain it.
That's exactly what I'm doing.
I know I'm being difficult here. I guess I would say he wanted them to be identified and recognized.
Like a crucifixion.
Essentially, but then at the same time, he vaporized Skank and Gutter Boy. Those bodies weren't left alive. So we never saw if their bodies made it out and if their eyes were or were not missing, so...
Excellently explained, Nick.
Not really, but thank you.
Speaking of Supernatural, my last big plot hole for the audience, and we're all wondering, how is the science behind Jamie's reincarnation work? Is he reincarnated, or did he body snatch a guy named Jake Casey? Because Jamie's scars from his altercation with the gang, they transfer onto the body of Jake. And like you mentioned in the plot talk, he says that, quote, "This is as close as I can come to who I once was." So does Jamie need to find a soul or a body that looks like him? Because the Jamie and Jake character do look very similar.
No, I think he just materialized himself into this thing that looks as close as he can, and he tried really hard, and he got as close as he could, and he's like, this is the best I got.
Why not turn back into Jamie if it's that?
Maybe it's really fucking hard to reincarnate yourself right into the person you were. I don't know. Maybe it's like, this is the closest I could come to looking like Jamie again.
Kind of like when you're creating your character in a video game, you try to make it look like yourself really closely, but you just can't get it.
Yeah, or creating a clay sculpture of something. You go, this is the closest I could get to what I was going for.
Well, Jamie did a really good job because he looks,
Dude, he's 1980s Charlie Sheen. He's a heartthrob.
He's killing it.
He looks better. He's like, hey, this is new and improved Jamie. What you think?
All right, so whatever afterlife that Jamie was in, he was assigned the mission to recreate himself and seek revenge on his killers.
Yes.
And that was the best he can do.
And he did it.
I think we plugged the plot holes.
We've tried.
But I got a question to bring up. Did this ruin any movie careers?
I don't think so, because like you said, this was a bit of an indie film. So I don't know the careers beforehand, because clearly Randy Quaid and Charlie Sheen went on to great success. So,
well, and that's the thing. So Charlie Sheen, Randy Quaid, and Clint Howard all have something in common. They have famous relatives.
It's a good point.
Charlie Sheen, as we all know, is the son of Martin Sheen, brother of Emilio Estevez. Randy Quaid, brother of Dennis Quaid. Clint Howard, brother of Ron Howard. So these three names seem to come out of this movie unscathed.
They're bulletproof in Hollywood.
Also, this movie came out right before the movie Platoon. Nick, earlier in the week, I shared a clip with you of Jay Leno's garage where he brought on Charlie Sheen, and they were actually talking about this movie, and they were showcasing the Dodge. Charlie Sheen even was like, yeah, I still to this day don't really know what was happening. Like, was I like a ghost? Was I the car? I don't know. Like, I don't know what's happening in 1986 is The Wraith. On the trivia here, it says Charlie Sheen shot this for one day because he's not in this movie a lot.
It's mostly just the car.
His on-screen time is very limited.
Maybe 20 lines of dialogue.
Yeah, so the trivia portion says he was filming for one day. I find that a little hard to believe, maybe a week's worth of filming, but he is not really featured in this movie a lot.
If you think about his scenes, though, there's about 3 locations that he films on.
There's the river hangout, the highway, the burger joint, and Carrie's house.
Yeah, which could feasibly in Tucson, because this was filmed on location in Tucson, could all be within 20 minutes of each other. So it's doable.
So he filmed this right before the Oscar-winning movie of Platoon, and Oliver Stone, the director of Platoon, saw The Wraith in theaters and called Charlie Sheen and was like, you can't do these kind of movies. You're going to ruin your career, and most importantly, you're going to ruin Platoon. He literally said that. He said that to Charlie. per Charlie on Jay Leno's Garage.
Yeah.
Please don't do these crappy movies. You're going to ruin my career. Like, that's how bad he thought this movie was.
Makes sense.
So, yeah, other than like the famous relatives, like these other named actors, I can't really say I've seen them in anything else.
No, neither can I.
Funny enough, Nick Cassavetes, he went on to be a director. You're not going to believe this. But guess what famous romantic movie he directed?
I'm not going to guess. Let me know.
The Notebook. This crazy, psychotic, sociopath, misogynist character of Packard, played by Nick Cassavetes, went on to direct the romantic movie The Notebook.
That's surprising. It is, and it also isn't, because The Notebook, no offense to people who like romantic movies, they're not directorial triumphs. They're just romance bait.
He also directed John Q and Alpha Dog, if you ever seen those movies.
He did John Q.
He did John Q.
That's a fantastic... You ever seen John Q?
I haven't.
You know what it's about?
No.
John Q's with Denzel Washington,
Does
his
he like
son...
he's like holding a hospital hostage. He needs like a heart
to
transplant.
get his son a heart transplant.
That came back to me right away.
Yeah, you want to cry? Watch John Q.
Yeah, so he went on to direct The Notebook and John Q, of all things.
Well, give him a little more respect now.
Yeah, so I think a lot of these other actors kind of went on to be crew members. Like Billy, he became a casting director. So, pretty cool. Johnny Depp was dating Sherilyn Fenn during this filming, and he was actually on location, living in the hotels with the crew. And he was also considered to be Jake or Augie. He was considered for those two roles.
I could see that. I think he would have been a better Jake. No offense to Charlie Sheen. Charlie Sheen's not much of an actor.
He did not bring much to the table in this role.
No. If you could just be a pretty face at the time, you'd be fine.
For the question of did this movie ruin careers?
Yeah, it's just, for me, it's hard to say it ruined a career when this was, like we were saying in the beginning, a little bit more of an indie film. So there's nothing to say that this would have catapulted anybody. It's an indie film that ended up having some larger names down the road that now we go back and watch it. But how much of a trajectory was, the actor who played Billy really on? It's not like he was on this ascension and then it just killed the momentum. Clearly it didn't kill Sheen's career.
I think it's because Platoon came out that same year. So a stinker comes out.
Big time.
And then Platoon comes out and they're like, oh, Charlie Sheen's legit. And Randy Quaid, at this point, he's already been Cousin Eddie.
Yes.
In National Lampoon's Vacation. So he's kind of like set in stone. And then Clint Howard is just the brother of Ron Howard.
Yeah, if it would have killed careers, people would have said, wow, I saw Charlie Sheen in that.
Besides those guys. I'm saying like the other guys I've never heard of.
Yeah, but it's not like any of those guys were on the path to stardom or ascension, and then this movie cut them off at the knees. And then ended up finding success in other parts of Hollywood, so good on them for doing that. But
so no, did not ruin careers.
I don't think so, not for me. It didn't make careers, that's for sure. No.
So Nick, I think we need to shift gears.
Shift automatic gears.
And get into our final review of The Wraith.
Final review. Fight.
So Rotten Tomatoes has this, the critics have this at a 36, audience has it as a 61. I can see that's a little more of an audience pleaser. Metacritic has similar splits, right? Their critics have it at 3.9, audience has it at a 7.6. So again, we see that large chasm, almost 3-4 point chasm between the critics and the audience.
It's a sign of a cult classic.
And IMDb, the wild card of all, has it honestly right in the middle at a 5.9. So a lot of variation between critics, between the audience.
If anything, this is better what I expected from this movie. Nick, why don't you hit me with a sarcastic selling point here?
It's a Greek tragedy with cars and 80s music. A forbidden love. One of the lover gets murdered by a jealous boyfriend, and then that person comes back to exact revenge. The Odyssey has a bunch of stories like this. Forbidden love, jealous lovers, murder, revenge. So it's not the storyline isn't necessarily new. They just threw a bunch of cars and sick 80s synth music and futuristic looking shit and classic 80s villains and said, hey, we can try and sell this. And it's the 80s. There's no rules. Summer blockbusters, bitch.
I did have a movie plus movie equals this movie.
Hit me.
It came to me pretty easily. I said this is Rebel Without a Cause meets I Know What You Did Last Summer.
Ooh.
Set to the backdrop of a drama version of Hot Rod's Energy.
Okay. I can see all that. Here's a question for you, just off the cuff. You mentioned Hot Rod. Would this movie have been more fun as a bit of a comedy? Like if there was some comedic relief in here?
Oh, buddy, this was a comedy to me.
Oh, I know. But if it was overtly a comedy, do you think this would have maybe been a little more like if the Wraith was remade today with Andy Samberg and, you know, let's
just say Danny McBride and let's say Bill Hader and let's say Yorma from The Lonely Island, just to name a random gang of names.
Yeah, Danny McBride is Packard
and Chris Parnell.
Chris Parnell is Billy. This would be a fun movie as a comedy.
I will reveal my honest, laughable logline, followed by my popcorn points, and of course my final thoughts on the film, which may not be a lot. My logline is, a murder victim comes back from the dead as a different person, but he's also a car, to seek revenge on the street racing gang that forces motorists on the highways of Arizona to race for pink slips. So I'm about to say something ultra controversial. Like, you may completely disagree, and please do not hold back. This movie does get a specialized score from me, and it's the first of its kind. This score is unique, and feel free to follow suit with me, but this is going to be the so bad it's good score of a sexy 6.9. You may not agree with the rating on this movie particularly.
Oh my goodness, James.
But this movie hits me as a 6.9 popcorn points. I think it kind of rings true because I think a 7.0, that's in the threshold of a good movie to me, whereas the 6 ratings are kind of trending towards bad. So with a score of a 6.9, I think it doesn't necessarily deserve to be a good movie. I've said this in the past. Anything with a 7 or above is something I would probably rewatch. And anything with a 7 or below a 7 is something I would
Pour
not.
Another drink here. I did not expect this.
Anything below a 7 is something I'm not going to rewatch. I got to say, with this movie, this was so horrible that I was captivated the entire time. And when I found this movie and thought, hey, I want to break down cheesy movies, this is exactly what I wanted. This is exactly what I want. I wanted awesome soundtrack from the 80s. This movie was completely watchable to me. And yet it was so bad, but I couldn't take my eyes off of it. So many plot holes. Nothing was explained. And I loved it for no good reason. I couldn't take my eyes off of it, and I was enjoying every single second of it. I'm just going to stamp it with the controversial score of a 6.9.
I want you to mark today on your calendars, everybody, as the beginning of the end for the Just Play It podcast. That's a tough one, buddy. Well, let me get into my thing. So let me give you my log line. I said a psychopath kills a guy who comes back as a car and murders his crew of fucked up outcasts. 3.1.
Oh, no.
I have to be. So let me say this, James. Let me say this.
Is this still better than your rating of Stealth?
It's better than Stealth. It's better than Hulk. 100%. So the way we look at our rating scales, so how I rate this film as a film doesn't affect my rewatchability of it. If somebody said, let's sit down and rewatch The Wraith, I'd say, fuck it. Like, let's have a party. Right? Let's watch The Wraith. I wouldn't say that for Stealth. I may not even say that for Fifth Element. I may not say, I'm not trying to get through all that again. So it's rated lower than Fifth Element for me, but I'd watch it again over Fifth Element on a personal level.
That's what I'm saying.
But yeah, so I agree with that. But as a film,
it's horrible.
As a film,
it's horrible.
Yes, to have like I need to keep my integrity of my ratings in my mind. Of were there plot holes? It was Swiss cheese. Were questions answered? Not a chance. This was worse than a press secretary standing up there after a disaster, right? There's no questions answered. Symbolism that's never tied back to anything. I feel like there was an extra hour of footage that could have explained this that just got left on the cutting room floor. There's nothing here to make me as a viewer feel fulfilled in the story. Was it awful and cheesy and everything I love about 80s movies? Abso-fucking-lutely. If you said, hey, the rating scale is, what is Nick's rewatchability scale? This is a 7.5. But as a film, objectively, as I rate it among the echelon of other things that I've watched, it's easily a 3.1. I didn't dip it down to the 2 because, honestly, I could have made an argument for this to be in the 1s, just with how poorly it was executed. The fact that I actually enjoyed it keeps it into the 3s, but I can't go higher than that. The acting was awful. The writing was just stereotypical 80s. The editing was nothing to praise. There was no part of this movie that I was like, they did this part really well. I struggled with it because I found myself sitting there watching this movie and being like, I'm genuinely want to see what's coming next. And so at the end of the day, this has to be a 3.1 from me. I'll rewatch it with you any day of the week, buddy.
Thank you.
Fuck it. But it's not a good film. It's a 3.1 from your boy.
Well, for all the bad things you said, that just hits harder for me of what I find in the charm in this movie. And I am so glad that you rated it so low and I gave it the fan service cult classic rating of a 6.9. Ladies and gentlemen, you are literally witnessing the yin and yang that is James and Nick. All the things you said rang true. And for whatever reason, this movie just hit that sweet spot of it's so terrible that I am enjoying this. And it gets to sneak past Fifth Element and Mad Max and Escape from New York and slip into that coveted spot of a sexy 6.9. Some unseasoned popcorn from me, a bag of kernels from Nicholas DeGicklis. Honestly, that results in a very balanced rating of a 5. Which I can't really be mad at.
I'm losing sleep tonight, but that's okay.
Hey, drink some more whiskey there, Nick. Please listen to our podcast next week where we will be celebrating May the 4th, except it will be on May the 3rd because our episodes come out on Wednesdays.
But you might listen to it on the 4th. Who knows?
I think we should start heading gone. Let's get on out of here. Nick, thank you so much for your time.
Until next week, friends.
Do yourself a favor and be here.